They say women fear the gynecologist more than the pain itself, that crawling dread that starts days before the appointment, the way we rehearse excuses to cancel, the shallow breathing when we sign in at reception, clutching our purses like shields. But what if I told you that cold metallic tool that makes us flinch carries not just discomfort, but generations of trauma? I wasn't always Dr. Amara Johnson. I wasn't always the woman designing the future of women's healthcare. I was once just a terrified 17-year-old girl on a paper-covered table, wondering why my body seemed to remember a violation I'd never experienced. I'm the granddaughter of a woman whose body was treated as a battlefield for science. And this is the story of how I reclaimed what was stolen from her, from all of us. This is the story of Clara Mae and the instrument that changed women's medicine forever. I was 17 when I first heard that dreaded phrase, "Now scoot down a little further." The fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting everyone in that sickly, unforgiving glow. My mother sat in the corner, scrolling through her phone, pretending this wasn't happening. The nurse had been kind enough, handing me a paper gown that opened in the front, telling me to undress from the waist down like it was as casual as trying on shoes. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles while I waited, counting the tiny holes, 147 in each tile, 8 tiles across, 1,176 holes to focus on instead of my thundering heart. When Dr. Miller walked in, a man older than my father, I nearly bolted. But where would I go, half naked and terrified? "First exam?" he asked, not really looking at me as he washed his hands. Just a quick look, nothing to worry about. But my body knew better. It tensed when he sat on that rolling stool. It flinched when he snapped on gloves. And when he reached for that duck-billed metal instrument, the speculum, something primal in me screamed. "Try to relax," he said, as if relaxation were possible while cold metal pushed its way inside me. "It only hurts if you tense up." I gasped at the pressure, the invasion, the humiliating exposure. "Almost done," he muttered, focused on whatever he was seeing, not on me, not on the tears sliding silently into my hair. Afterward in the car, my mother said, "That wasn't so bad, was it?" But it was. Not just physically uncomfortable, though it certainly was that, but violating in some ancestral way I couldn't articulate. Like my body was remembering something my mind had never known. It would be years before I understood why. I never planned to become a doctor. I wanted to be a journalist, uncovering stories that needed telling. But life has its own way of choosing our paths. During my sophomore year of college, my grandmother died. Esther Mae Johnson, 93 years old, a woman of few words but immense dignity. The kind who wore stockings even in August heat, who never let anyone, not even her husband of 60 years, see her undressed, who refused medical care even as cancer ate her alive. "Doctors don't help women like me," she'd say, and we thought it was just the stubborn talk of an old woman who didn't understand modern medicine. We were wrong. She understood too well. After the funeral, I helped clean out her house. The task fell to me because I was on summer break while my parents both worked. It was in the attic among quilts and photo albums that I found the box. Cedar wood with brass hinges tarnished green with age. No lock, just a simple latch. Inside, yellowed papers, medical documents from the 1800s, and a letter in handwriting I didn't recognize. To whoever finds this, know I was not a volunteer. The letter was signed Clara Mae Johnson, my great-great-grandmother, born into slavery in Alabama, 1845, the property of a plantation owner named William Sims, whose brother was a doctor with ambitions. Dr. James Marion Sims, the so-called father of the modern gynecology, the man who would forever alter the course of women's medicine and my family's history. In medical school, they taught us about Sims as a pioneer, a medical revolutionary who developed techniques to repair vesicovaginal fistula, a devastating complication of childbirth where a hole forms between the bladder and vagina, leaving women incontinent and often socially ostracized. They taught us about his speculum design, still used today with only minor modifications, about his suturing techniques, about his rise to prominence, eventually becoming president of the American Medical Association. What they didn't teach us was how he achieved these breakthroughs. They didn't mention Clara Mae, or Anarcha, or Lucy, or Betsy, the enslaved women we know by name, or the dozens more whose names are lost to history. They didn't teach us that Sims performed experimental surgeries on these women without anesthesia, even though it was available at the time, that he operated on some of them 30 times or more, that he invited other white doctors to watch these procedures with black women spread open like specimens, fully conscious and in excruciating pain. They didn't teach us that when these women screamed, Sims documented it as not suffering as white women would. They didn't teach us that the modern speculum, that cold metal instrument that makes us all clench in anticipation, was perfected through black women's torture. The history books speak of Sims' dedication and persistence. They rarely mention who paid the price for his success. Clara Mae paid it. My blood paid it. And as I sat in that attic reading her words, something clicked into place. The reason my body tensed on that examination table, the reason my grandmother refused medical care, our bodies remembered what our minds were never taught. I almost quit medical school after finding Clara Mae's letter. What place did I have in a system built on the exploitation of women who looked like me? What good could I do in a field that had caused such harm? But then I thought about what leaving would accomplish. If I walked away, Clara Mae's suffering would remain unacknowledged. The system would continue unchanged. Another generation of women would lie on tables, feeling that same instinctual dread, never knowing why. So I stayed. And I started asking questions. In my second year, during a lecture on the history of gynecological advances, the professor showed a slide of Sims alongside his famous speculum design. This innovation revolutionized women's health care, he said, clicking to the next slide. My hand shot up before I could reconsider. What about the women he experimented on? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Shouldn't we acknowledge them too? The lecture hall went quiet. The professor blinked, adjusting his glasses. Well, he said finally, that was a different time. We have to separate the scientific achievements from the methods used to obtain them. But do we? I persisted. If those methods involve torture, shouldn't that be part of the story we tell? Shouldn't we say their names? He cleared his throat. Perhaps that's a discussion for an ethics class, not a medical history lecture. With respect, I said, if medical history doesn't include medical ethics, aren't we doomed to repeat our mistakes? Later in the hallway, a classmate caught up with me. Jessica, a white girl from Connecticut I'd barely spoken to before. That was brave, she said. My great-grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. When people talk about medical advances from Nazi experiments without acknowledging where they came from, it feels like erasing her suffering all over again. I nodded, surprised by the connection, by the understanding in her eyes. Maybe we should start a group, she suggested, to talk about the ethical foundations of medicine, the parts they don't teach us. That afternoon, First Do No Harm was born. 5 students at first, then 15, then 40. A space to discuss the darker side of medical history and how to ensure we didn't perpetuate its legacy. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. It happened during my 3rd year of medical school. I was on my OB/GYN rotation, learning to perform the very exams that had once terrified me, to use the very instrument whose history haunted me. I was scrolling through Twitter during a rare break when I saw it. A crowd gathered in Central Park chanting as workers removed the statue of Marion Sims from its pedestal. After years of protests, the New York City government had finally agreed to relocate it away from the East Harlem neighborhood, where it had stood like a monument to oppression. I watched the video, tears streaming down my face in the hospital break room. A nurse asked if I was okay. "They're taking down the Sims statue," I explained, showing her my phone. She frowned. "Who?" And that was part of the problem, wasn't it? Most people, even many healthcare workers, had no idea who Sims was, what he'd done, or whose bodies had paid for his acclaim. That evening, after my shift, I took the subway to Central Park. The statue was already gone, but the empty pedestal remained, surrounded by flowers left by activists. I added my own, a single magnolia, Clara Mae's favorite according to family stories. As I stood there, a young black girl, maybe 11 or 12, approached with her mother. "What happened to the statue?" she asked, pointing at the empty space. Her mother hesitated. "They took down a statue of a man who hurt people, black women like us." The girl considered this. "Good," she said finally. "Did they put up a statue of the women instead?" Out of the mouths of babes. "Not yet," her mother said. "But maybe someday." I walked home that night with a new purpose forming in my mind. Not just to practice medicine differently, but to change it fundamentally, to ensure those women's suffering wasn't in vain. The statue had fallen, but the tool it celebrated was still in use in every gynecologist's office around the world. That needed to change too. My senior project was supposed to be a literature review on disparities in pain management. Important work, certainly, but not enough. Instead, I proposed something radical, a complete redesign of the speculum. The basic design hasn't changed significantly since Sims created it in the 1840s, I told my advisor. That's not just a failure of innovation, it's a perpetuation of trauma. Dr. Reynolds, a white woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a reputation for pushing boundaries, studied me over her reading glasses. "It's ambitious," she said finally. "Maybe too ambitious for a senior project." "With respect," I replied. "If not now, when? If not me, who?" She smiled then, a slow spreading thing. "You'll need collaborators, engineers, material scientists, industrial designers." "I've already reached out to the engineering department," I said, "and I have a list of women from diverse backgrounds willing to participate in focus groups." Dr. Reynolds leaned back in her chair. "You're really serious about this?" "Clara Mae didn't have a choice," I said quietly. "But I do. That project became my mission. We started with the basic problems, the coldness of metal, the clicking ratchet that sounds like something from a torture chamber, the duckbill shape that feels as invasive as it looks. We interviewed hundreds of women, different ages, races, backgrounds, women who'd experienced sexual trauma, women with disabilities, trans men who still needed gynecological care. "It feels like it wasn't designed for comfort," one woman said. "Because it wasn't," I replied. "It was designed for visibility, for the doctor's convenience, not the patient's comfort." We went through dozens of prototypes, materials that warmed to body temperature, shapes that minimized pressure while maintaining the necessary visibility, mechanisms that opened smoothly, silently. We added features no one had thought to include before. A soft light at the end, eliminating the need for that harsh external lamp. A rounded, tapered tip for easier insertion. An ergonomic handle for providers with different hand sizes. The final design was beautiful, functional, revolutionary in its simplicity and consideration. We called it the Clarity Speculum, not because it provided better clarity for the doctor, though it did, but because it clarified something essential, that women's comfort matters, that medical care should heal, not harm. When we presented it at the Medical Innovation Showcase, the response was overwhelming. Nurses cried. Doctors admitted they'd always hated using the traditional speculum. Medical device companies began reaching out with manufacturing proposals. It wasn't just about a better tool, it was about acknowledging the harm done and committing to a different future. It was about saying, "We remember and we're doing better." The speculum was just the beginning. During our research, we discovered something else, the power of information. Women repeatedly told us that what made gynecological exams so frightening wasn't just physical discomfort. It was the lack of control, the not knowing what was happening or why. So we developed an app to accompany our new speculum. Something that explained every part of a gynecological exam in clear, compassionate language, with illustrations, with videos, with a voice that sounded like a friend, not a textbook. We included features no one had thought to before. A pause button patients could press during their exam if they needed a moment. A communication card for patients who found it difficult to speak about certain issues. A preparation guide that went beyond empty your bladder, addressing anxiety, trauma responses, and grounding techniques. We made it available in 12 languages. We made a version with simplified language for those with cognitive disabilities or limited health literacy. We made it accessible to screen readers for visually impaired users. And most importantly, we included the history, an honest account of how modern gynecology began, who Marion Sims was, and the women whose suffering had been erased. Because you can't truly heal what you don't acknowledge. The app was downloaded 500,000 times in its first month. Women wrote to us saying they'd gotten their first pap smear in years because the app helped them feel prepared. Doctors reported patients arriving calmer, more informed, better able to participate in their care. A small revolution, happening one exam room at a time. I dream of her sometimes. Clara Mae in a white dress, standing in a field of magnolias, not as she appears in the clinical photograph Sims took, exposed, objectified, dehumanized, but whole, dignified, free. In these dreams, I sit beside her, my white coat crisp, my stethoscope around my neck. "I help women feel safe again, Grandma," I tell her. She nods, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. and I made sure they remember you. Because they say the dead can't speak, but I can. For her, for all of us. Sometimes in these dreams, she reaches out and touches my face with hands that feel like sunshine. You are my legacy, she says, not his speculum, you. I wake from these dreams with tears on my face, but they're not tears of sorrow. They're tears of purpose, of connection across time. Last month, I received an email from the New York Academy of Medicine. They're creating a new permanent exhibition on the ethical foundations of modern medicine. They want to feature Clara Mae's story alongside our new Speculum design. We believe it's time to tell the complete story, the curator wrote. When I visit the exhibition next spring, Clara Mae's letter will be displayed alongside Sims's instruments, her name as prominent as his. Her humanity recognized at last, it's not enough. It will never be enough for what she endured. But it's something, a step toward healing a wound that has festered for generations. When I walk into an exam room now as Dr. Amara Johnson, OB-GYN, I don't just see a patient. I see generations. I see what was taken and what we're finally reclaiming, one body at a time, one story at a time. I see women who flinch before I've even touched them, their bodies remembering what their minds were never taught. I see the relief in their eyes when I show them our redesigned speculum, explain how it works, ask for their consent at every step. I see the change when I tell them, if you need me to stop at any point, just say so. This is your body, you're in control here. Words Clara Mae never heard, control she never had. The speculum may have once symbolized pain, exploitation, the worst of what medicine can be when it forgets the humanity of those it claims to serve. But in my hands, it becomes something else: justice, legacy, and healing. Today, when I teach medical students, I bring Clara Mae with me. I tell her story. I pass around the traditional speculum alongside our new design and ask them to consider the difference, not just in form, but in intention. Medicine is not neutral, I tell them. Our tools are not neutral. They carry history, power, and responsibility. Never forget whose bodies made your knowledge possible. Some shift uncomfortably, some nod in understanding. All of them, I hope, will practice differently because of what they've heard, because women's bodies remember. They tense, they protect, they know. And finally, we're listening to them. They say women fear the gynecologist more than the pain itself. I say we have our reasons. But I also say we can change this story. If Clara Mae's journey touched something in you today, here's how you can be part of this healing revolution. Subscribe to hear more untold stories of the women whose bodies built modern medicine. Next week, we'll explore the forgotten mothers of the birth control movement. Share this video with every woman you know who's ever felt that inexplicable dread in a doctor's office. Let them know they're not alone. Their bodies remember what history tried to erase. Comment below, what medical experience made you feel powerless? Or if you're in healthcare, how are you changing the narrative? My great-great-grandmother couldn't change her circumstances, but her legacy, carried in my blood, in my hands, in my work, is changing them for others. Maybe somewhere beyond this life she knows. Maybe she sees women walking into exam rooms without that crawling dread. Maybe she hears doctors asking for consent, explaining procedures, honoring boundaries. I like to think she knows her suffering wasn't for nothing, that her great-great-granddaughter took the pain in her blood and transformed it into purpose. because sometimes the most revolutionary act is remembering, and sometimes remembering changes everything. Thank you for bearing witness to Clara Mae's story. Every view helps ensure she is never forgotten again.